All right, Shalom, Yashala. Real quick video giving all praises to Yahweh by Hashem Yahweh Shai by Hashem Rakah Kadash. Barakatah Yahweh, Barakatah Yahweh Shai, double honors to the apostles, elders, bishops, great millstone, much salutations to the brothers teaching the word for the hopeful elect, soon to be elect, most high will. The hopeful extended elect, Shalom. Blessings. I have a map up here that I want to key in with the name Scotland. Now, you see Europe right here, a vast land. And Europe is not one of the continents, but it developed into a country. Back then, people would, even today, people still like, well, that person's European and they related to a so-called white person. But that's not factual. Even when I asked ChatGPT, it says ancient population in Scotland, the earliest people in Scotland, Mesolithic and Neolithic periods likely had darker skin than many modern Scots, similar to the other early Europeans. Genetic studies suggest early Europeans often had dark hair, dark eyes, and medium to dark skin, with lighter skin becoming more common later due to adaptation to low low climate effects. That could possibly play a part, but they were also mixing what you got so-called mix. It also says traits like red hair and very pale skin are more common in Scotland today, but they represent one part of a much broader genetic mix. A lot of our people that you would think that are so-called white people that have red hair, like I think to name some, if you're familiar with what's his name? Simply Red. As a singer, Sheena Easton. I think she has natural red hair, but Sheena Easton's from Scotland. I think Simply Red. He's from the UK. So when you hear those names, are people representing themselves or identifying themselves with red sometime because of their red hair, and frizzy or curly, if you will. They could easily go back to Europe, Europe, which were our people, dark-skinned people, the original so-called Europeans, we say. I do have a map. Now I did. There's a Scotland world map. This is the one I pulled up. I want to show you how many dark-skinned people in the regional lands. Here's Scotland right here, and then you have all in here Ireland and the Dutch and the Wales and who else? You have the Denmark, which is the mark of Dan. And then you have right here, you have Turkey. All these dark-skinned people lands. Israel, Egypt, Asia, which is so-called Middle East, Western Asia, Saudi Arabia, even in the lands. I mean, a lot of this stuff, a lot of the lands are gentrified, which means the migration of whether it was slaves or them the slaves, so-called slave masters taking over the land. dominating, moving into the land and taking over like they did America. Um, so, if you from Scotland and there's dark-skinned people for the majority, then you say, well, you could easily substitute that for black land or the land of dark people. Uh, so Scotland, black land, black man. Beam me up, Scottie. They say is from Star Trek. They say it was an engineer that was into trans uh, fascinated with transporting of human beings or what have you. Uh, I still think it goes back to beam me up, black man, beam me up, Scottie. Um, they also have a term that they say he got off scot free, which is based on a man named Dred Scott, which I forget what he did or what they blamed him for, but they blamed him and they think they locked him in the prison. I gotta go revisit that story. But when a person say I got off scot free, they talking about him. So even some of the things that might have been offensive or terms of identifying a certain people or race, whatever, it can easily be used, even in the case of mockery, to where it would be a common thing that people say, and a lot of people don't even know where it came from. So, maybe so-called European women, when they say tall, dark, and handsome, and I think the apostle did a video about it, it really mean a man of dark skin, tall and dark skin. But the so-called white people would say today, well, it's talking about a so-called white man with black hair or dark hair. So, and you see that early Europeans, I just pointed out that they had dark hair, dark skin, dark eyes. So yeah, um, so we Europe for 1,000 years, a little bit plus, and so you can imagine also, having laying down with those Edomite women, um, and a lot of them other women that we had as concubines. They have even pictures, Roman pictures, old European, so-called European pictures that depict the black man being royalty during the time of the Moors, which was the same, time, when we ruled the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Rome. Moor means dark skin. It means black, you know, uh, or more, you would sometimes hear Moorish, blackish. They actually did Anthony Anderson, I think his name is. He actually did a show called Blackish. Um, so, and that's a term that could be used as derogatory or, misused, you know, in the way that people would use it. Just like Jewish people, that means you're somewhat you Jewish. You're not the real Jew. You're Jewish. But you could go down the rabbit hole with that. Um, you know, uh, our people were Israelites, um, and we ruled Europe. We're not Africans, but we were in Egypt, and it says that in the scriptures. Here's Egypt right here. Here's Israel, pretty much not too far from Egypt, and then here's old Babylon, which is Iraq. So our people were captive in Babylon. So all these regional places, our people were even close to being at home, which is Israel, dark-skinned people. So how did this so-called white man come out and say, well, yeah, everybody was so-called white. Well, everybody was white like them, which that white is a color they were really red, the red man of the earth, which it talks about in the Bible, him being born as Esau. Um, so um, you'll have people that say that the Son of God was Mediterranean, you know, or you might have some called the Mediterranean people, Mediterranean Sea right here, but that's not a nationality, man. Mediterranean is not a nationality. If I go to New York and I'm called a New Yorkan because I'm in New York, I'm not. New Yorkan doesn't express my identity, you know, and all New Yorkans don't do the same thing, and really don't talk the same way. But you could catch similar accents to where like, oh, you must be from New York or the East Coast. um, you know, that's the thing too. But you can move to another land and altogether lose your accent. I mean, if you go down south and you stay there over time, 10 to 20 years, you're gonna start speaking like them. So, you know, your identity doesn't your language and your accent doesn't identify your identity. It doesn't express your identity. Um, so, um, Scotland. Well, I'll go to the scripture because I've already talked too much. But it talks about Asia in the scriptures, you know, and it says where the Jews were dwelling, like Acts 2:8, and how here we every man in our own tongue wherein we were born, Parthians and Medes and Elamites and dwellers in Mesopotamia and in Judea and Cappadocia and Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia. I might be saying those wrong. In Egypt and in the parts of Libya about Cyrene. And you see the Libya on the map right here. Let me see. And of course, you see, shows you Asia. Here's Libya right here, which would be dark-skinned people. Um, you know, Parthians and all that. That's cool. So these are dark-skinned people. Even in here's the European Russia. Even in we were the first Russians, man. So don't get it twisted. They act like we just came off the slave ships and that's the origin of our existence. That's not true. Um, Let me see if it's more on that. People from Scotland were never on. Earlier inhabitants were likely darker than the modern, like I read. Scotland has always had genetic and physical diversity. If you want, I can explain how climate affects. See, and they're gonna juice that, climate affects skin color, like, in the cold areas of the mountains and certain regional places that were colder with hardly no sun or whatever the fact it may be, that they turn lighter skin. Like I said, you can't. That does have an effect. No sun, of course. Of course, when you're in the sun all day, you can you're gonna turn darker. Uh, but that doesn't tell the identity of a person according to their bloodline. But the fathers do, going back to the fathers, and a lot of it has to do with it could be land, especially in the earlier days, because people named the land after them. The land was named after the fathers. Uh, like if you have America, you have the founding fathers of America. They all Edomites. Amerigo Vespucci, I forget if he was a Spaniard or Yeah, I think he was a Spaniard or something. But his line goes back to Spain. But we ruled Spain, and we talk Spanish. Our people talk Latin form of Spanish, or a Spanish form of Latin. Um, and so just because you're from Spain back then, that doesn't mean that you were Spanish people. That doesn't mean if you're from Scotland that's your bloodline. You know, so if you have a born in Scotland, and a lot of and most of the people are dark skinned, like I said, they're gonna be like that's the land of the dark people. Before it's even called a name. Or look, it says Scotland to Ireland, which means angry land. That's where you get that word irate from. Ireland, the fighting Irish. Wales or England. England means Wales means foreigner. England means the land of angels. So these all have significant meanings to relate to us being scattered among these heathens, and in some cases, well, in the case of the Byzantine Empire, us ruling here for 1,000 years plus more. So of course we're gonna start laying down with the women concubines of these other nations, and they're gonna start looking like these other nations. It'll be is what they call so-called mix, but it's not really mix. It's from the lineage of your fathers who you are. So, um, and the same thing with the list that I was reading on down in Egypt and Libya about Cyrene and the strangers of Rome. Because you had something called the Roman Empire. I mean, it's like a Holy Roman Empire. Eastern Rome. You could look that up. And Jews and proselytes. So, you know, even when they took over, you know, as the Roman Empire, to where they're trying to rebuild Rome through America, which is considered Rome all over again, the last leg of Rome, like the apostles always say. Um, if we're not home, we're strangers. If we're not in Jerusalem, we're strangers. Going to war with the Arabs during the last of the Byzantine Empire, toward the last of our ruling Byzantine Empire, a lot of our people, which were called Moors, a lot of times mean dark skin. It's not a nationality. Uh, then they became Arabians. I mean, they became, they converted to being Muslims, or in those Arabian uh, places of the land. I mean, even today, you got our people, worship, being Muslims and saying Allah and all that, but that's really belongs to them. We really gave that to them. Really, Arabia, if you go back, it means the man of the desert, which, that was Ishmael. But Ishmael was born out of the loins of Abraham, but he wasn't the chosen seed. So a lot of these nations come from our fathers. Even going back to Noah, having those three sons, we're not Ham and we're not Japhet, but we're Shem, calling Shemites. That's what the Jewish people say, Semites, Semitic, but it's Shemitic. Shemitic. So it's more Shemitic people than they are, and it's more Shemitic people than we are, because they come out from Noah. But that side of Ham and Japhet, they're not even related to us. They're completely whole different nation of people. So just because we're in Egypt, and that doesn't mean we're Africans. Just because we're called Africans, that don't mean we're Africans. Just because we're in Scotland, that don't mean we're Scottish people. We can be called Scottish people and related to Scottish people, but when you like we said, when you break it down, is some land that where dark people dwelt. That's not a nationality. So you got to get to the origin of where really people came from concerning their birth. Because where do you have a thing called birthright, which Esau sold his birthright? His whole nation would have been blessed, but it wasn't supposed to be like that. So birthright is, so to speak, an inherited. Let me look that up for I ramble on. What is a birthright? Birthright is something you are entitled to simply because of the circumstances of your birth. It usually refers to rights, privileges, or possessions you inherit automatically. Why? Because of your fathers, without having to earn them. Family or inheritance, often used in terms of property titles or family wealth. The eldest son in some particular cultures, historical cultures had the birthright to inherit the family estate. So it's kind of like the Edomites today. They have certain, they call it white privilege, but like I said, they're not white, so they have Edomite privilege where they get treated better. They first to get hired, they're last to get fired. Their support system is greater. They got better food choices in their neighborhood. They have you know a better lifestyle or a better conditions of living because uh, of the so-called white privilege that they have. And on the other hand, Israel, not so much because we're from a whole different nation. But coming out of these places, these lands, I mean, if going back to this map, let's say you have people in Scotland right here, and they all dark skinned, but you have the early Europeans, which are dark skinned, and there's it's part of the same people, and the Wales and stuff like that. And I'll get into another video where the Dutch goes back to us too. Um, then you're gonna be like, you know, uh, and then during the Byzantine Empire and during black so-called, black people ruling, you'll have our people. Well, let me spread out. Let me go toward, this land and come out from with some property myself. Now that we ruling, it's kind of like what they did with America. They had land rush and they had um, the gold rush and they had all those things that first grabs, first putting your stake in the land and it's yours. So America was like divided and to pieces with the people running for that land to gain it. So some of them became greedy and killed each other. But they're the same race of people. Coming to take over this land. So that happened too. It also happened with Jake. So those common causes, especially when it's a new land, and it's almost like when a unfortunate situation with your family, and then they're gonna say, well, who's gonna get passed down to the family the family inheritance? Who's gonna get it? Who's that gonna be passed down to? And you got like 10 children, like that. I think it should be me. Well, the oldest son, might not deserve it. So then they might have some controversy right there. Um, that happened with Solomon too, and his sons, Jeroboam and Rehoboam, and it was a division. But they were both Israelites. They were both all Israelites. You know, they just split. So those divided kingdoms come back together. But my main point in this is you could be from Scotland, you could be from Western Asia, you could be from Egypt, Morocco, Libya, Western Africa mainly. You could be from these lands and still be an Israelite, because a lot of these lands were conquered and renamed after the oppressor. Like this was a land that no man dwelt before here in America, and when they came over and slaughtered our people, it was named after Amerigo Vespucci. So then, people that were born here and raised here, they would be called Americans. But really, we know we're not Americans. We're black in America. They got a song, Jesse Johnson of the Prince era. He had a song called Being Black in America. And that's the same where these places are too. Being, especially when the enemy is taking over, being black in Europe, being black. And, but before the enemy conquered, you didn't have to have that, you know, what would you call it? That express tape. You wouldn't have that. It's a word that I can't think of, man. But you wouldn't have to have that kind of definition about anything. Uh, but for the sake of resistance and fighting oppression, you create an identity, and that's what they're trying to say about us. But that's not the case, man. Just because we don't have what the Edomites have and the power, and that we are in our curses, we're not on the highways and byways because we're but hurt about what's done to us. We're on the highways and byways because the Most High told us to do that, and it's according to prophecy. In any other situation that we were in this captivity, especially when it comes to biblical portions and biblical facts that we try to, do according to what the Father has told us, that would reign supreme, and even as our identity as Israelites, as well as the sons of God. So it has nothing to do with the land you were born in, but it does. It does, um, pinpoint a lot of historical facts about us being who we are. So Scotland, yeah, black land. Anyway, hope it's that fine. To the next video. Shalom.